Have you ever wondered what it was like to play lacrosse back in the day? Not 1800s or 1900s, but the 1400s, the 1500s, and 1600s? That was when the Native Americans were still roaming around and still playing the game of lacrosse. But now looking at today and how the game has changed so much, you will literally see the advancements the games of lacrosse have made. To understand the differences of Native American lacrosse and 20th century lacrosse, we are going to go over the history, the changes, and the new leagues created of lacrosse. First of all, lacrosse originates back to the 1400s, but it wasn't first documented until 1636. So, considering that it was first documented in 1636, you would expect a league to be created like soon after that, or like maybe a couple years later. No. Europeans in Canada began playing in 1840. Then the first organization was created in 1842 in Montreal. So it wasn't even like that lacrosse had kept playing since 1636. Like, we don't know what happened from the time of 1636 to 1840. All we know is that it was first documented then, and it was first played in Canada in 1842. So, according to an article written by College Sports Scholarship, games could have lasted from dusk to dawn or 2 to 3 days. So this is crazy just thinking about it, but now we don't have that type of time. We literally play a full game, which is 4 quarters, and we have halftime, so we get a break. But I see why they did it, because this was to strengthen their young fighting men for war. And like, lacrosse was another way to have tribal fights. So instead of going to actual war with other tribes, they would play the game of lacrosse, and the winner would take the land, or like whatever circumstance it was. Next, on to the changes and how Native Americans really began the game, and we changed the game over time. The game of lacrosse used to be played with rocks and wooden balls. Now they are played with rubber. So consider a lacrosse ball to a rock. Their lacrosse ball is made out of rubber, so it's fully circular and sphere. A rock could have different deformations and everything. I wondered how they threw the ball and everything without dropping it. It would be a lot harder then than it is now. Next, fields are now 110 yards, which is crazy compared to what they were. They used to be 500 yards long or a mile long. So back then, Native Americans used to be in pretty good shape, running up and down that 500 yards to a mile field. So as time went on, colleges began getting built, and sports got put into colleges. But not many colleges had college lacrosse, because it wasn't that big of a sport. No one played it. It was just a sport the Native Americans played, and then the Canadians played. So it started getting bigger and bigger, and then finally, schools started at it. But now looking at it today, in the 20th century, lacrosse has been added to so many D1 schools. And like, D1 they all have the sport. As stated in lacrosse, then and now, Native Americans played without pads. Crazy to think that they would play without pads, because if we play without pads now, it would suck. Like, we have so much padding to protect our bodies and just protect athletes in general. Native Americans did not have those pads to protect themselves. Finally, going into 2019, there's already been a league created called the MLL, which was the Major League Lacrosse, but their, ratings started to go down. So Paul Rabel, a lacrosse player, created a league called the PLL. It stands for the Premier League Lacrosse, in 2019. And creating the PLL just helped the sport gain more rating, and like, The sport over the last 2 years has gotten a lot more popular, which I love to see. So, an article stated LeBron James doesn't even have highlights of himself, while PLL athletes are promoted to do that. So, the PLL is different from like any other league. Like, LeBron James doesn't post highlights of himself on his Instagram, his Twitter, or anything. But the PLL, they're promoted to do that, so they get people to look at what the sport is and how, I don't know, how they can play, get people more interested into the game. Now, not back then, but like in the 2011, 2012, when the MLL was still around, well, it's still around today, but it's not as big. Their games was televised, but they weren't really like televised. Like nobody knew that their games were on or anything. But now lacrosse is more heavily televised and sponsored by NBC Sports. So now that PLL is sponsored by the NBC, we're going to have games on Saturdays on NBC or NBC Sports. So they're more popular channels, and people are going to be able to see the sport more and see how popular it is and how the game goes. Lacrosse is a growing sport. It is gaining more popularity over the years. With the new league, the history changing, and the changes made, the sport will begin to grow more. I hope hearing this, you will truly show you the stride that lacrosse has taken to become a bigger sport.